I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Edward. I'm an Australian Lebanese, of Lebanese origin. And I'm a member of the United Australian Lebanese movement, a movement which works at promoting good ties between Australia and Lebanon and good practice and government practice which we take from Australia. How do I find myself here today? Well, like what Susan said, the woman that we were looking up on the screen, her name Mother Agnes, she was an inspiration for me to actually join this movement, which is a movement to promote reconciliation and peace in Syria. Our aims are not violence, we don't want to support any side, we're just promoting reconciliation and peace. So the first time I met Mother Agnes was in Australia, and she gave us a background on her story, which was she was a nun, and she is a nun still today, and she was serving for 15 years in a province in Syria called Homs, which is on the western side of Syria, not far from the border with Lebanon. And from that location, that church, or they call it Arabic Dead, which is a place where they congregate, she entered the conflict from afar, which was at first as a witness to the events which were happening. And when she saw what was happening there with her own eyes, she decided that she was going to take it upon herself to spread the message of what is happening there and the truth. So with that background message of Mother Agnes, I think I find myself in the same position. Although I'm not on the same religious level as Mother Agnes, I find myself, after hearing the stories from people who have come from Syria, like Nina and Layla and Susan, who have lived in Syria, and from close friends, I feel that I as well have to I guess, reveal the truth to the people that I know and friends. So earlier this year, I went on a holiday to Lebanon, which is something I like to do regularly, once a year. And I took the opportunity to visit some of the Syrian refugee camps with Mother Agnes and witness firsthand what is happening in Syria. First of all, it's very hard to bracket all the refugees in the same category. You have, in Lebanon, you have over 200,000 refugees. At this stage, it's estimated close to 400,000, which works out to be about 10% of the population. So if you compare that to Australia, it's the equivalent of having 2 million refugees entering Australia in a period of 2 years. So the situation in Lebanon is quite tough economically for the people, because the government is struggling to support this large number of refugees. So a brief summary of the refugees: you have some Syrians who are actually quite well off, who are living in good conditions. You have a middle class, and you probably have a very, very poor struggling class who are really struggling to live in the more expensive Lebanon. My engagement with the refugees was on all levels. I met a lot of well-off Syrians and a lot of middle class, but I'd like to focus this discussion with some of the worst-off conditions I saw firsthand in Syria. So I went to a refugee camp on the border of Syria and Lebanon in the Bekaa Valley, which is in the east. And our mission, we had two main objectives when we went to the refugee camp. The first objective of us was to listen to the refugees, to hear what they have to say. What are their needs, how did they find themselves here, and how they see they can get out of the situation. And then the second objective was to provide aid, either through materialistic or non-materialistic. So I'll start first with what I heard from the refugees in this specific camp, which numbered in the hundreds of refugees. In general, the majority of the Syrian refugees left Syria as they told me, due to a lie. They had been told by members within the community who were not Syrians that if they leave Syria, they'll be given a new home, they'd be given food, and they'd be living in a first world standard. And all this was promised to them on the context that they leave Syria and depart these cities and allow non-Syrian rebels to occupy these villages. After coming to Lebanon, I think they found it was quite the contrary. The conditions were shocking, to say the least. They found themselves in areas of farming land with no accommodation whatsoever, and they were forced to collect as much money as they could just to pay for tenting and food and basic necessities just to survive. And I'd say that the conditions were so bad to the state that when we entered one of the campsites and we were talking to them, they were asking us, we brought with us some bread just to give out to them. And out of the hundreds, they were fighting with each other just to take a piece of bread, just to give you an idea of how desperate the conditions were. In one of the tents as well, they had one of the women who was forced into prostitution to collect, I think, maybe $10 or something like that. So you have a very, very poor situation. And in discussions with them, I found out that most of them came from a background. We're not talking about a background as an educated background. Some had university degrees. All of them had finished school. All of them were working. Most of them lived in a house. So they're not leaving from very poor conditions. They're actually leaving from average conditions to zero. So the move was quite hard for them, and they were a bit confused as to how they found themselves here. In other camps that I had met, the story was a bit different. They had spoken about being forced to leave by foreign rebels. They had mentioned that in some of their areas, foreigners had come in and forced them to leave because they refused to join their group or their armed struggle against the national government. And some of these areas were closer to the northern border with Turkey. And these stories were similar to the stories that we heard from Nina, where you have a high level of kidnappings, people killed and murdered just because they don't support, I guess, the notion of producing an Islamic State in an extremist way. So they were the two refugee groups that I met, the ones that were forced to flee and the ones who, as they mentioned to me, were tricked into fleeing with the hope of getting a better life. So with that context in mind, I'd like to go to where I see it as here as Australians and the role that we maybe can provide in terms of aid, because the reconciliation group in Syria itself does focus on promoting reconciliation between conflicting groups. At this stage, as far as I understand, it doesn't exclude foreign fighters who have come from countries, Islamic countries, to make an Islamic State in Syria. This is limited to reconciliation between Syrian groups. So one of the aim of the reconciliation is to promote reconciliation, and the second aim is to actually provide materialistic aid mainly through food, medicine, basic utensils for the house, blankets, and that stuff. And that's what I found the Musalaha group, or the reconciliation group in Lebanon, was focusing on, was the Syrian refugees. We'd go into the refugee camps and see if we could provide what aid we could to them. So just to end, I'd like to, we've got someone here with us from World Vision, and I understand that they're doing a great job helping people across the world in Lebanon and been there for the last 30 years. As a Australian with Middle Eastern background, I'm just a bit concerned with the amount of aid which, not to the fault of any group, seems to get funded to the wrong corridors, and it finds itself, rather than providing food or basic necessities, finds itself paying for arms and guns, which actually only promotes more violence rather than solving. So I guess if we can take one thing from today, maybe if we can challenge whoever is providing aid to these people to be accountable for where the money is going, that would be something positive.
I might ask Lala to speak as well. Just